In this video I get the right rear wheel finished up, the disc brake installed, and the engine mounted on the unit, and next is the figuring out how far I need to extend the frame to clear the front wheel from the engine. I thought it would be better if I put nuts down here on this part of the wheel. You know, I welded the ones there and I made them so socket would fit over them still when I ground them. That was why I ground the weld, just to make sure I could put a socket on them and still tighten them up. But anyway, I decided to put nuts on this side too instead of just using the nuts on the pulley. So I got to shorten these up a little bit to put the pulley back on. So I measured a lock washer and nut assembly, and that's how it is. So I got to shorten these sleeves up that much. And then we can get the pulley back on. That's better. I feel better now with having the nuts down in there, and then the, I don't know if they show up, I don't think they do, but the nuts down in there and then the sleeve and then the nut for the pulley. It just a little more secure, I think. And then if I sell it, somebody ever goes to take the pulley off and forgets to deflate the tire, they won't have a mishap. So anyway, there we go. It's all together. Let's get this axle rod out so I can put the bigger one in. This is welded here and here. I took a screwdriver to see if it was welded in here, and it's not. I can clearly move it on both sides there. So we got the plasma cutter out, so I can, and that's where it's welded, right in each place there and there. And I think I'm going to mark down these, take a good picture of that, because that's going to be the model number of the project I'm working on. The Trikeabout is going to be the original Sears model, and I might on the underside of the engine plate stamp in Old Car Alley 2023 or something like that. But there we go. Let's get this old shaft out of there. There we go. We got the old axle off. I stripped it down to the frame because I'm going to throw this in the bead blast cabinet and clean all this up. I'm going to just take the whole thing down to bare metal, and then if it rusts I'll just sand it or re-bead blast it. But it'll just weld easier and work easier if it's devoid of paint and rust. And then once I start building it, it may not fit in the blast cabinet, so that's why I'm going to do it right now. I'm going to photograph that and try and all the bits and pieces are up there, but I think it's gonna fit in there. We'll see. Fits in there pretty nicely, so I'll get that thing all down to bare metal. Yeah, this thing will clean up in no time at all. Yeah, that paint is not on there very heavy. It just comes right off. Alright, let me get this cleaned up and then we'll go from there. Found something interesting on this little tricycle. It's all brazed together. You can see the brass around in there and there. Yeah, I think that's kind of interesting. Anyway, we gave it a quick end-to-end bead blasting. You can still see a little bit of the Sears decal. I could see it quite clearly at one point when I got the paint off, but you know, I'm going to have to sand this down because I just wanted to get the most of the stuff off of it so I could weld to it and stuff. But I'll sand it all out really good before I prime it and paint it, and just wanted to get it cleaned up here so I can get this in and have something clean to weld it to. Kind of setting the rear wheels up on here, and I was thinking of putting the disc brake on the front, but I decided not to because I want the front to look clean, and I don't want it to have that, you know, I'd like to have a band brake, but I can't find one, you know, just can't kind of keep it that mid-50s vintage. But I'm going to make something to where I can mount that disc brake right in there. So I think that's pretty good. I'm going to start working on figuring out how to get the rotor to the wheel. I think I might just weld some bolts to it that there's holes in there, and I might have to elongate them because this is larger than what the hole pattern is. And then I can just and I'd like it out a little bit, like right there too, so I could you know, put a spacer or something on that side of it to put the rotor where I want it. These are 3/4 of an inch from here to here on both sides, so these studs don't hit the metal as the tire is going around. And I'll put nylocks on here, and I'll probably grind those down a little bit just so there's not as much. And I might even do that now so that I can get the wheel exactly where I want it, and then I can set this wheel the same distance. And you can kind of see this wheel's only held together with one bolt, so I got to bolt it together too, so I can I'm just kind of seeing what I'm doing here. After much horsing around, I was thinking of putting this on the front wheel, but I'm definitely putting it on the rear wheel. It needs to be off the rim a little bit, so I put some nuts on there to give it that gap. And I'm going to weld those studs right to this. So I taped up the bearings so I can throw this in the blast cabinet and get the paint off here. So those will weld to this, and I'll probably knock the bearing out. In fact, maybe I'll just knock the bearing out now and then save getting dirt in that bearing, and then I'll weld it up. Got the rotor mounted on there. You can see how I welded those all threads onto the hub, and I put a nut on the back side so they're, it's kind of like double nutted. And then the caliper will go on here, and I'll make some little brackets to go from the frame to those bolts that hold it to the or the caliper to the frame. But I think that's going to look pretty darn nice. I thought about putting it on the front, but it just didn't look right. I held it up to the front wheel and stuff, and I just wanted to have that look. So anyway, I'm going to make the disc this up for this wheel and get that installed, and then maybe I want to fasten the axle in, and so the wheels are on before I make a bracket for the caliper. I don't want to make something and then have to have it different. So I want this axle tacked in, cut to length, all the so it's mounted. The tires are permanently mounted. I'll have to make a little sleeve to go between there to keep that gap right, and I'll do that too. The other wheel with the disc brake is done. You can see the rotor on there, and the wheels all bolted together with the disc on there that's gonna say REO, and I think it's gonna look good. All right, so the next step is the axle. Get that right, and I gotta get some sleeves that'll fit over there and weld the I'm not going to tell you, I'll just show you when I do it. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to weld that threaded nubbin on there, and then I can thread this, and I cut it so that the nylock will be on the threads, and this will just be, it won't be tightened down, it'll just be kind of run up and touching the bearing, because I don't want to put too much pressure on them and blow the cheap bearings out. That's all what it looks like welded. I just threw a nice bead around there. I ground it in, as you saw, and that's the finish side. Rear wheel assembly is on and assembled, mounted, everything's secure. It rolls. It looks good. Yeah, it rolls nice. Super easy to roll. And I'm gonna put the disc brake caliper on next, and then I'll have to block this up and level that pad so I can put the engine plate, kind of tack it in place so the engine pulley lines up with the wheel pulley, and I want the engine as far back as I can put it, so I have to extend that as little as possible. So anyway, let me I'm going to cut some paper pattern out for that bolt pattern there to attach the caliper, and you can see I'll easily have, welded to this, and I think I'll put the caliper right there. So I'm going to make a paper pattern and cut a piece out of metal, make it look nice, and then weld it to this. and I think that'll be fine. And you don't need to move that much to break, so the pull lever up there won't need a lot of movement on it. I just sat here and made a pattern. I put the caliper about where it goes, and just, I think that'll look pretty good right in there. And I'm going to plasma cut that out of steel, and it has a little bend, and then it'll weld to the bar there. So let me get that traced out on some metal and get it cut out. Cut the little piece out and transfer punched it, and now I'm going to drill it, and then I'm going to bolt it to this, and then I'll figure out how much and where I got to bend it, get it fitting perfect, and then I'll tack it on. Here's my little bracket that I made to mount the caliper. Pretty simple. Let me bolt it to the caliper, and then I'll tack it to the frame. After tacking it on and pushing it around on the floor and working the caliper and whatnot, that felt pretty good, so I just welded it up solid. The axle still isn't welded on. That's just sitting there. I'll weld that on after I get the engine plate welded to it, and then I'll weld it probably here, there, and where it was welded originally, and that'll give it a lot of strength. But there we go. We got a caliper bracket. I'll let that cool down, then I'm going to mount the caliper and see how it fits after it's, you know, sometimes welding it up warps a little bit, and then you just got to re-straighten it or re-bend it a little just to get it right. But I'm just going to let it cool down, then try and put the caliper back on, see how it does. There we go. It's all rolling. It's got a disc brake on it that works. You can hear it's just rubbing on the rotor a little bit. It'll wear in, but it totally, try and do this one-handed, roll it a little bit here, and there you go. It works. I'm pretty happy with it. It looks pretty darn nice on there. So all the mechanicals, like I say, I'll probably tape off where the rotor runs on here and leave that bare metal, but I'll paint this stuff the engine mechanical green. That'll be green. The bracket will be cream with the frame. Probably paint the wheels green, cream, because these discs will be cream with the REO on them. And I think the next step will be getting it mounted up level here and start working on figuring out where I want to put the engine exactly. So I get the engine plate installed. I'm looking at how I'm going to mount the engine. So I got the engine plate out and kind of put it between the engine and this wooden base I made, and it's almost the right height, so I can kind of see what I'm doing here. And I'm thinking, I like the engine where it's at, and the pulleys are pretty much all lined up, I do believe. I don't know if that shows up in there or not, but anyway, take my word for it. And I got this step about level, and I want to the engine plate is quite a ways from the bike frame here, so what I was going to do was either use angle iron or the square iron, because this is what I have around here, and I'm thinking I'm going to use this because it just looks a little cleaner, and I can cut the front on a 45 and finish it nicely so it looks nice. But I'm thinking of flipping this plate so longer ends over here, give me something to weld the, you know, a belt tensioner clutch mechanism to, which is going to be right in here, and that'll give me something good to weld to, much more so than if this was welded to the plate. It would have to be excuse me, this would have to be welded here to the bottom of that, and that would only give me that little bit there to weld to, where here I'd have a little bit more to weld to for a, you know, if I have to weld something for the clutch underneath the plate, I'd rather keep it above the plate, keep as much ground clearance as I can. But, you know, we'll just have to play around with it and horse with it. But I think this is what I'm going to use. I think I'm not going to use this. And I'm going to turn this plate around and see how it looks there, and then we'll start maybe tacking some things up to mount the engine. This is the time-consuming part, figuring out where to mount and how to mount the engine. So I actually put this engine up a little bit on the one side, and I took the muffler off because I'm just going to make a custom exhaust and the muffler was in the way. And I'm going to, I did a little measuring, so it's 3/4 of an inch from this plate to this. I made a mark there and a mark there, and it's 12 9/16 inches to the tip. So I'm going to cut this to where it comes right to the tip, and like I said, I'll have a 45 on the end of that. And then I'll have to measure the additional, so 12 9/16 plus whatever distance from this to the axle. And I'll have to tack the axle to the frame, tack this to the axle. And I might have to notch a little out of there. And if I do, I'll tack it there, and then I'll tack the engine plate to it. Make sure everything's nice and square to the axle. I'll use a T-square on the axle to this. And see if we can't, oh, and I also measured from the V pulley, the V part of the pulley to there, and that was 1 1/16. So I got some measurements, and I'm going to put this right at the edge of this on both sides, and I think that'll be fine. And then eventually, like I say, I can make something that go from this to there, you know, with a nut, kind of like the lawnmowers did, but that'll keep this, if it needs it, it'll give it support. If I don't need it, I won't make anything here, and I'll take that off. But I have a feeling I'm going to need that, so that's why I saved that originally. You know, I just saved everything that came with the engine. And then as far as the belt goes, the belt's going to come like so down the right in here, so I might have to trim a little bit of the gas tank bracket out, and if I do, I'll have to repaint the gas tank, which is really no big deal. And this cover, I'll have, and obviously I'll, you know, have to do some cutting and rebuilding, and you know, that's, but this will give me quite a bit of the stuff I need to you know, because the belt going down will be here like so. And I'm not sure if I'll probably put the belt tensioner on the bottom down in here, but we'll deal with that when we get to it. The next thing I really need to do is get the engine mounted, and then I can, you know, and you can see this might work for the downward. I might have cut the sheet metal off here and make everything new and cut some of this out, and may have to cut a little of this out. We'll wait and see on that. That'll be the last thing, making the sheet metal covers after the engine and everything and the belt tensioner and belt and everything's on. We'll worry about the sheet metal. But let me start figuring out what I need to cut this and get things tacked, and we'll go from there. The engine is mounted. The engine base is just tacked into place. It's not welded solid by any means, but I just kind of wanted to make sure the pulleys line up, which they certainly do. I was just kind of, anyway, yeah, the pulleys, my fat fingers in there so you can't really see, but they do line up. And this plate's level to this. This tilts back a little bit when this is level up, like so. But that's the way it was when it was just assembled as a tricycle. But I think what I'm going to do now is weld the engine up solid, and then I'm going to put the engines all the way back, well, almost all the way back, within that far, the end of the holes going back. But I'll put the engine all the way forward to figure out how long I got to extend the front, you know, this, so it doesn't hit the engine. That'll probably be right about there. So I'll, you know, or maybe there, probably about there. So the tires in front of the engine mount plate. And anyway, well, let me get this thing, I'll weld that up solid. There's no reason I can't do that now. And we'll move on from there. Got a little carried away and over penetrated a little bit right in there. I'm going to grind that down a little bit right now. But I'll finish all the welds completely really nicely before I paint it. But I just, you know, like I say, this goal is just to get it together so the engine mount plate's on, and next we'll whack this off and figure out what we need to do to get that a little further out. I bolted the engine loosely to the plate and put it all the way forward on the elongated holes, and I even used the rubber mounts that came with on both sides there. And I'm going to figure out where I can put this. You can see that that's kind of on an angle ahead, so I want to get that as close to there as possible. But I think, and that's going to be kind of there. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount the wheel. I got to make some things to mount the wheel to the forks, and then I'm going to start figuring out, you know, I'll cut this off and start figuring out the length I gotta extend the tube. I got somewhere around here, I did pick up a pipe the same diameter to extend the tube, and I might, you can see how it's kind of casually bent, and I want to keep that angle so the caster's right. And I think I'm going to have to heat this with a torch to put some bend in it when I get ready to mount it up. But in the meantime, I'm going to get this wheel affixed to the forks. I'm just sitting here figuring out how much longer to make the forks, and you can see I measured from center to center about 1.5 inches, and I want to go maybe 2 inches here, 1.5 inches, 2 inches here. I think I'm going to go 2 inches because the tire is a little bigger around. And then I gotta, because this one it's standing up will be like here, so this will have to slope, you know, start curving more in a level plane. So I might even have to heat it around in here, and I don't know, we'll see. But I think I'm going to cut this off so I can attach it to there and get a better picture of how long I need to make my metal bracket to extend the forks down. And it's going to be at least 2 inches because, like I say, that's 1.5 inches and this is a little bigger tire. Alright, I gotta hold this. I'm holding this up to the bike with the engine sitting here on it. I'm thinking it looks funny if the tire's out of the fender, so I'm going to put it so it's right there, and that's about 3 inches. And I'll make it so, you know, if I want to change it, I can. So I'm going to make a pattern. I'm just going to weld a piece inside the fork here and down to, so it can, and I'll make something that looks neat, something that, you know, is a little rounded, and obviously we'll have a hole for that. So if the nuts come loose slightly, the wheel doesn't fall off. But I think that is going to do the job. And then, like I say, I can put that to here and bend this with the settling torch if I need to. I made a pattern out of cardboard, as you can see. And I kind of like the way that looks. And I can grind the metal when I make it out of metal until, you know, it really has the look. Like I might make it the same width here all the way down, then just kind of have that bigger around. Kind of like the tricycle wheel where the bearing was there, bigger around. But I think that's, I'm gonna work on this tomorrow. I think I'll edit you guys up a video. I have other commitments tonight, so I don't have any more time to work on it. So we'll continue on tomorrow, and like I say, I'll get this video up for you yet tonight. So I'll put this video up for you guys so you can see what all I'm doing on the Trikeabout. If you like the video, definitely hit the like button. It certainly helps. If you like my channel, you can subscribe by hitting that 348 engine icon that pops up there. And thank you for watching my video.